Welcome to Tanooki Talks, where we take a look at new, emerging, and, well, just plain interesting technology through the eyes of entrepreneurs, with Tanooki Labs co-founders Eric Skiff and Dave Renz. I'm Dan Scholes. Let's get into it. Today, we're going to have the How This Should Have Started episode of the podcast. Well, sort of. Part of what we're going to be looking at now and in the future is not just our commentary on what's happening in the world of technology today and possibly in the future, but also looking at the entrepreneurial journey, how our founders have found themselves at a point where, I need to build something to help my business grow. And then what it's like to go through the build process, fundraising or bootstrapping if they're doing either of those two paths, and then what the future holds for their product, for themselves, for the company, and what they think about the future itself. We're going to start that with a bit of an experiment here with our Tanooki co-founders, Eric Skiff and Dave Renz.
I'll start just by saying, I think everyone has ideas. You come up with an idea and you think that might be a business. And then there's the catalyst of, no, I really have an insight that can be built into a product that can be turned into a money generating endeavor. And you take the leap. And from that point, you have to figure out a lot all at once. You need to figure out how to do your sales, how to manage the business, how to deliver the product that you've promised. And some of that's going to involve technology, which is probably not also your area of expertise. So we work primarily with folks who've got some deep domain expertise in some particular area, and I would say that's been across 100 industries or more at this point, because we don't really need that to be in a particular spot. We just need the entrepreneur to know their industry well and to have a key insight about it. And so for us, Tanooki was essentially the same story. We had deep insight on how to build things. We had run an innovation lab and gotten to build 7 products in 14 months, which was just absolutely bananas and so much fun, and also an incredible challenge at the same time. And then out of those 7 products we built, we learned how to go from, we're sort of handcrafting and customizing the first one from scratch. And by the 7th one, it was a little bit more of a factory floor of, we know exactly what we need to do to set up the plan, to build the team, to build the product, and then to get it out to market. And so after that experience, we decided we have friends who are trying to build things and really getting stuck on the technology, choosing the right tech, choosing the right partners, actually getting it built and following a plan. What if instead of trying to find people to run the companies we come up with, we flip it and work for some of our friends who need tech built? And very quickly, that turned into us running an agency that had a number of projects cooking all at once. And I don't think we ever really set out to be a industry specific agency that served a certain need, but it was easy to see how that was the way we were going to model what we wanted to do, which was build things and never stop learning and just get to play endlessly with new ideas. So this show, I hope, is very much about that we get to talk about some of the things that our friends have wanted to build, that the people we work with want to build, and how we helped make that happen and why it's exciting, because it is every time.
Yeah, I think to throw in a little bit on that as well with, just kind of how we came to things in terms of Tanooki, and then maybe we can transition that a little bit to the thing, Dan, you want to talk about the OS thing. In terms of backgrounds, like Eric and I have pretty, I'd say, similar backgrounds in the sense that we both did computer science in college and then kind of worked in, I'll call them like corporate technology organizations before we did the innovation lab thing. And yeah, I think one thing, I took from, at least from that along the way, is just like kind of an orientation towards like repeatability and, and process, and being able to do, for doing the same thing for 20 different people, like how can we do that better and more efficiently? And that I think was something that I really resonated with in the whole labs concept at AOL, in trying to do that 14-month sprint and do it repeatedly and sustainably. And so that was, I think, another kind of component of it, where when we started doing this, as Eric said, just with some friends, and some folks, and then it became something we had to start doing more rigorously and routinely, there started to be some tools that started to make sense for us to want to consider doing to make it a little bit more easy just for us to live sane lives, but also operate well and give our clients a better experience, right? In terms of like what kind of reports they get, or to the other end of things like how we manage our cash flow and how we model our resources and things like that. So there's a lot we can dig into probably there as well.
So as you guys were setting this up, was there ever a question of taking on some investment, or was it always just an idea of bootstrapping it and building as you went? Because I feel like that has a interesting lens on the product itself that we're going to talk about, which is TanookiOS, which is an operating system for an agency.
Yeah, I think if we talk about this in the way that it would apply to other people's journeys, we're a little different than a lot of the folks that we work with that we did bootstrap the company. But I think that's more natural for an agency. You don't really need investment to start an agency. It would have made some things earlier much easier. But at the same time, we don't need a bunch of capital to build a product when the thing we're selling is ultimately our labor and the labor of other folks that we bring into the fold applied to the needs of the people who hire us. So you can bootstrap an agency. We had the opportunity to take some funding, but it was unclear why. We didn't really need to grow faster than we were. In fact, we'd probably grown a little too fast at the beginning and then really needed skills more than anything. We needed to level up what we knew about running an agency, about being the best job that the people who work with us ever have, about serving the people that we work for in a way that makes them just delighted and want to recommend us to everyone. Those are high goals. And it's a difficult task to find yourself in the middle and actually adding value on both sides. So we then wanted to build ourselves things that helped do that better. And that's really, what we're going to talk about today is the tooling that helps us run an agency. And so it'll be most applicable to anyone who is providing a service with a team to an end customer. We figured out some things that I think are pretty normal and standard, but also everyone has to figure out on this journey.
Well, and I also think interestingly, had we taken some sort of funding up front for this, I think it would have, I mean, it probably would have been negative in the sense that I think we might have spent some of that on building tools we didn't need. By the virtue of, us being able to do it this way, where I think that's one of the hard things about folks on the venture cycle is like, you can't take 10 years like we did to, mature and get things, moving smoothly and things like that. You have to do it in like two, and then you have to do it again, and then you have to do it again, and you have to do it again. That makes sense for, that type of business. But yeah, for us, an agency, like Eric said, it's not really the type of thing you do. That said, we did, I think, try in between the lab and starting Tanooki, we did spend some time thinking about trying to spin up an incubator sort of situation. And we were trying to fundraise for that, which we were not good at. Neat idea, but honestly, I think I'm kind of glad we didn't get that money because this ended up being, I think, a better way for us to hone what we were doing in a real world environment rather than with kind of this artificial cushion of venture money that would have been tough to use really well, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I think when we went into this, we hoped that working with a couple dozen to now, over 150 founders would teach us so much about what business is ripe and opportune to start that we would be able to go start our own thing and it would be unicorns and rainbows. And ultimately, no, I think what we've learned is it's really hard to start a business. It's hard to find a great idea that isn't in a crowded space. And it takes courage and years of just absolute dogged pursuit of that one thing. And instead, what we learned was how to build the thing really well. And we continue to get better at that. And so that's where we've just continued to focus is we're going to be the best implement to build things. And sometimes those might be our own, but that's not really the goal anymore. The goal is just to continue to be great at building.
So let's talk about the agency. It's a business model that everybody seems to think is pretty straightforward and easy to implement. You find a couple clients, you do the thing you're good at, people pay you, wash, rinse, repeat. When did you realize that there was something that needed a little bit extra help in that process? When And what was that catalyst?
In perfect, ultimately fair equilibrium, the client would pay exactly what you pay the contractor, right? That would be if there was no value you're adding, how it worked. That's not the case, right? Ultimately, you're helping the contractor or the full-timer provide more than they would be able to do on their own by giving them frameworks and skills and process. And for the person who's paying, you're providing them with more clarity, more certainty, and more insurance that if something goes wrong, it'll get handled. And so there's value added in the middle. And that's ultimately what you're doing as an agency, is saying the sum of the parts together is more than they would be individually. And so there's money to be made. You have to be careful not to overdo it, right? You can't underpay people and hire juniors when you're promising senior level talent. You can't sell the services for too little and then realize that you're paying more out than you're getting paid. So you find that balance. And running that agency is the constant rebalancing of those forces. Am I paying people enough to have the best talent and to make them feel valued and to be doing some good? Am I charging enough to make that viable and valuable without gouging people? And have we earned our reputation for being very good value for the money that people are spending? So for us, we have done many different iterations on that model where trying to figure out exactly how much you've spent and how much you're making and how you're delivering on that is something that most people running the agency don't realize is a whole job. And you need to measure and maintain along the way, or it very quickly falls out of balance.
Yeah, the measure and maintain, and like I think keep as close to reality as possible. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
as I say this, like I feel like we could do like a whole episode on the agency. I was gonna say trials and tribulations, but whatever. There's all kinds of stuff along the way, but it's just a totally different business model than like product companies are. So it's in some sense, conversations we'd have like this with founders will be quite a bit different because there are things they do are different. Like one of the things we discovered pretty early is like really there's no way to you can't buy Google Ads to get more customers, in our world. Which is not the case for how many other businesses today that people start get people. So yeah, there's a lot of different things to pick up along the way.
Mm-hmm.
So the product, TanookiOS, what does it do? I mean, I know what it does,
Mm-hmm.
and and I use it daily. But what is the intent behind it? What was the problem being solved for you, for your staff, for your clients?
So I think ultimately there's those three buckets, and we'll talk about each of them in turn, but let's talk about us first. You want to run an agency. What does that mean? Well, you're going to hire some people to do the work, you're going to get paid to do some work, and then you have to figure out how to execute. And somewhere down the line, you're going to get a report from your accountants that says, oh, actually, you lost a bunch of money in August. And it's going to be a big surprise. And that really can't happen. You need to know when you need to dial up your sales and get more work in the door, or when you need to dial down a contractor because you're overspending. You need to know that very, very quickly and clearly. And the accounting world just works on a lag. And so if you're waiting until timesheets come in and whether or not you executed on that fixed bid project and everything gets settled out, that 6 to sometimes longer week lag from your books to your accountant to your report that you get can kill you. We read about the concept of a critical number, which is the thing that you can measure daily that will affect your business. And in the book, The Great Game of Business, they talk about it as being, the number of engines they remanufactured that week was the thing that they could measure very, very clearly. They could know that if we do X number, that means that we get X revenue. And so that probably means X profit. You can back calculate to what that means based on this thing that you can just count today and know how you're doing. And for an agency, it's really close to the metal. It's the number of hours that we build today that we believe we're getting paid for. How many billable hours did we do versus the capacity? How many billable hours did we pay people for today? If you've got 5 full-timers, multiply how many billable hours you expect times that number of people. That's your capacity. That's how many you probably should have done. And you can very quickly see, how do we do today? And if you measure it right, you can even say, well, we know exactly what we're paying for each hour, and we know exactly what we're getting paid for each hour, and we know our spread. Did we make money or lose money today? So After enough back and forths, we built it. We just decided that we know this data. It lives in Harvest, our time tracking tool. We're going to extract it on a 15-minute basis. We're going to update a database with those numbers, and we're going to multiply those times our rate and get what we've spent today. So we know our daily cost to run the business, and we're going to apply what we've made to it. What's our spread on each hour? And have we covered our overhead? And that concept of knowing what your overhead is, what's it cost us to run the business for all our full timers, our office expense, et cetera, and what are we making on each hour? And what did that hour cost us if it's a contractor hour? It's simple math. You've just got to build the tooling to do it. It can be an Excel spreadsheet, but for us, it's worked really well that we can build products. And so we built that ourselves.
That being like the core, right? Once you have that, then there's all kinds of other things that we were able to do. And that's, I think, over a multi-year process, we've said, well, okay, what next? It's really neat now that we don't have to update a spreadsheet once a day or every couple of days to see where we're at or where we're going to be as best we know. And then, so what else is taking a lot of our time? Turns out communication is very important in terms of making sure that projects go smoothly, people feel informed, everyone, but clients in particular. So then we built it turns out with all that time tracker data, then you can aggregate and send reports that are pretty useful and pretty targeted towards specific sorts of things that we do. And so we added that as a thing that helped our PMs stop having to do that manually. And then went from something that everyone was spending 4 to 6 hours a week on to like 2. It's not to say there's no work there, but that was another good example of finding some way that we could leverage ourselves better with a tool like this.
And so the other piece is that once you have that in the aggregate, you can also look at it person by person. And so TanookiOS for us shows us exactly how many hours any given person was projected to do, how many they did do, and how many they're projected for coming up. And so you can very quickly at a glance and see, how are we performing here? Are we producing the amount that we wanted to? Is there something blocking a project? And this happens all the time. Someone says they want us to do a bunch of work, but they won't really be prepared for us to do that work. They won't have the specs ready, or they won't have the technical systems lined up that we need to integrate against. And we've got somebody booked and ready and just not working. What a great early warning system for us to be able to look at this at a glance and see that. Also lets us tell our contractors in an automated way, and you get your once a week email that tells you exactly what you're booked on next week, how many hours we expect you to do on each project. All of this coordination that would usually be extremely, hand-to-hand combat for people running an agency is all information we know. It's in our forecast, it's in our time tracker, and we can distribute it out to the right people at the right time. That was the big learning for us, was so much of this is really simple and automatable if we just make sure to stay organized and build a little bit of tooling around it.
It's not that we're trying to sell this either, I guess. But again, we're not a product company, and that's fine. But it doesn't mean like building software doesn't make sense for us to do to enable our product, which is our service, better, right? And so I think that's kind of how we think about it: is like, does it make sense for people to spend time on this? And if they do, how is that going to impact things on a day-to-day or like a financial basis?
Yeah. And I will say, as somebody that uses the product a number of different ways on a daily basis, having that information and also having worked at agencies in the past that did not have anything similar and feeling very in the dark about both the future and expectations on an individual and a company wide level, having something like this is definitely key and helpful for planning and planning my team's time. So let's talk about the future. There's been some additions outside of Tanooki OS. I'm thinking of the Tanooki Copilot project that we were talking about earlier. Dave, you've mentioned we don't sell this. We could. This could be a public facing product at some point. What do you guys see as the future for OS?
I think seeing the future was the first big part. So for any agency can calculate what hours they worked, what they spent on them, and what they're owed. Being able to understand what's going to happen in 4 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks is the other great art of running an agency, and knowing when you need to be working on sales versus just working the work you have. We first built in the harvest forecast tool and pulled all that data in as well. And we made distinctions between work that's booked with clients we already know or the contract is signed and work that's prospect. So we can see the chart. Where are we going to be if we land all that prospect work? How many people would we need to hire? Where are we going to be if we book none of that and we just work with the clients we have? Allows us to adjust the ship. And I think any future work might be continuing to make that better, maybe adding more of a percentage to whether we think something's going to land so we have more certainty. And the other is looking backwards a little bit. I think if we were to apply this to other businesses, one tool that we built early on was much more about the fact that we were bootstrapped. We did not have a bunch of cash in the bank as a safety cushion, and the economy got real dicey, and a bunch of clients needed to slow down. And by slow down, I mean not pay us for a while. And some of that was for work that had been delivered. Some of that was for contracts that were promised that evaporated. And we needed to know very clearly just how many problems can we endure before we're at risk of not making payroll. And running an agency is, at least for the first couple of years before you have a nice cushion in the bank, is about the fear that you might really harm people. And if you're not careful, you can mess up people's lives. You either have to lay them off or not pay them. And no one ever wants to do that. And we've made it our goal to never, ever do that. So we also built a tool around cash flow management. We called it Cashy, put some modeling on what are the odds that something might not come through at all. And then let's run simulations. And I modeled it after, 538, the Nate Silver projection of, well, what if weird situations happen in Congress? What does it take for these 5 seats to flip and cause a weird outcome? It's called a Monte Carlo simulation. And it's basically you deal random cards out and say, well, what if these 4 things all happened at once? Hey, look, we go bankrupt. Okay, well, when and why? What 4 things happened? Is there anything we can do to correct that? I think if we were to ever build this again for other people, or if we were to advise folks on tools they would want early in an agency, some form of cash flow simulation where you're taking a look at what if, we called it the perfect storm, if 3 bad things happened at once. Well, multiple perfect storms happened at Tanooki in the early years. I think we would want to expect that 3 or more things can happen. That lightning is going to strike you a couple times. So you better prepare for it and model for it and know what you will do in those situations.
Yeah, and then as we go into the future, right, finding more opportunities for things like that we can continue to poke at, and just honestly make it easier to work with us. And I think as we do more and more, the next kind of module or component of this that we look at doing, I think it'll probably be somewhere towards the path of, does a client log in? How can we make it easier to work with us is really, I think, the guiding principle around something, one of them at least, around some of the stuff. So what does that mean? That's a good question. We'll see. But I think that's a direction.
I also think the great unanswered question for every agency is, well, how far along are we on the project? Is the money we've spent getting us where we need to go? And that's still a very manual process, even for us. I think we would probably continue to look towards, is there any way for us to gather information to give an informed answer on that easier, or to automate the answer around that? And we're at the point where, yeah, we could automate some of our manual tools and probably have a percentage bar of project completion on a lot of the projects we work on. So that sort of tooling is the holy grail. If you have all of that, then a lot of the questions and fears and anxieties of the person who's hiring you get assuaged by the fact that they can see it coming along, as long as they trust that and they believe it's real and they can see it happening as well.
And I think that speaks very well to focusing, as we've always discussed, on how the product is going to impact the end users, right? And in this case,
Right.
both the clients and the staff. It's making everybody's life easier, which in the end makes things more expeditious for the client, which makes their product builds go smoother and faster. And because we're a time and materials shop, less expensive. And in the end, kind of everybody wins by this one tool that was built to help clear up some fairly significant questions and muddiness in the agency process.
Yeah. And I think if anyone's listening to this and they aren't running an agency, the main takeaway is that that idea of a critical number really does apply to every business, whether you're, selling cat food or you're delivering service hours or you're building pools. You will be able to find a number that's easy to measure that drives all the rest of your numbers. And sometimes it's a little formula. It's the cost of this plus the revenue from that minus this overhead, or some other thing that you come up with. But if you can figure out that daily number, you can write it on the wall, then you can move it and change it and measure your business better. I would encourage everyone to try to figure that out. What is the thing that you can measure daily that drives that revenue report that comes 6 to 8 weeks too late?
And on that, I think we'll wrap it up. This has been super helpful, both from a process standpoint, but also I think this is really helpful information for all founders that are looking to get a product started. And I can't wait to start talking with some of our founders. Well, not you guys founders, but our client founders, and see their journeys and how they're building what they're using to make their lives and their customers' lives better.
Sounds good.
All right. Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And if there's something that you're looking to build, feel free to reach out at podcast@TanookiLabs.com and I'll be in touch. Thank you so much for listening. Talk again soon.